Chapter 23 of Grace Harlowe's Senior Year at High School by Jessie Graham Flower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23 The Message of the Violin. The news of the finding of the lost money in the haunted house came out in the evening paper and set the whole town of Oakdale agog with excitement. The sensational robbery at the close of the Thanksgiving bazaar was too bold to have been forgotten, and the news of the recovery of the hard-earned money was a matter of delight to the public-spirited citizens of the little northern city. The haunted house soon lost its ghost reputation and was ransacked by small boys on the hunt for sliding panels and hidden treasure until the owner of the place, who had been absent from Oakdale, took a hand in things and threatened severe penalties for trespassing, which greatly cooled the ardor of the youthful treasure seekers. As for Grace Harlowe and Eleanor Savelli, they were the bright and shining lights of the town and the darlings of the senior class. The two girls had become firm friends. After the excitement of the finding of the money had worn off, they had had a long talk and had cleared up all misunderstandings. Eleanor had confessed to Grace that long before they had been brought together she had secretly tired of the old grudge and had longed for peace. "After Edna Wright and I quarreled, I began to see things in a different light," Eleanor had confided to Grace, "and longing for the companionship of your kind of girls took me so strongly it made me miserable at times. How I did envy you when you all went to the house party at Christmas, and I was wild to go to New York and see Anne, although I suppose I am the last person she would care to see. It wasn't just the good times either that I coveted. It was that sense of comradeship that existed among you girls that I didn't at all understand last year." "But, Eleanor," Grace had said, "if you felt that way, why were you so determined to expose poor Marian Barber?" "When Marian told me what she had done, I felt the utmost contempt for her," Eleanor had replied. "My old idea of vengeance came to the front, and I thought of how completely I could humiliate you all through her. The day I quarreled with her in school I fully intended to expose her, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked the idea of it. I don't believe that I could ever have stood up before those girls and betrayed her." While Grace had listened to Eleanor, she had realized that the old whimsical, temperamental Eleanor was passing, and an entirely different girl was endeavoring to take her place. Grace exulted in her heart and dreamed great things for the Phi Sigma Tau when it should be restored to its original number of members. Eleanor had announced herself ready and eager to take her old place in the sorority, while Marian Barber had, with tears in her eyes, humbly petitioned Grace for her old place in the Phi Sigma Tau. "Silly girl," was Grace's answer. "You can't go back to what you never left, can you?" No one save Grace, Eleanor, and Mr. Harlowe knew of how near Marian had come to being discredited in the eyes of her class and friends, and they could be trusted with the secret. Henry Hammond left Oakdale the morning after he had been interviewed by Grace and Eleanor, and it was afterwards discovered that the land in which he had persuaded certain guileless citizens to invest money had proved worthless. The swindled ones joined forces and put the matter in the hands of a detective, but to no purpose, for no clue was found to his whereabouts. The strong box was turned over to the girls, and the money, which amounted to $510, was deposited in Upton Bank, with the $500 that had caused Marian Barber such anxiety and sorrow. The thief whom Grace had assisted in capturing was found to be a noted crook, known to the police as Larry the Locksmith, on account of his ability to pick locks. He was tried and sentenced to a number of years in the penitentiary, and departed from Oakdale, stolidly refusing to furnish the police with the identity of his pal. Easter was drawing near, and Grace was radiantly happy. Anne, whose engagement had stretched into the 8th week, would be home the following day. Mrs. Gray was looked for hourly, and the boys were coming from college on Monday. "We certainly will have a reunion," Nora O'Malley exclaimed joyously as she banged her books on the window sill of the senior locker room to emphasize her remark. "It seems good to have Grace with us once in a while," declared Jessica. "Her police court duties have kept her so busy that she has deserted her little playmates. Have you been asked to join the force yet, Grace?" she asked, trying to look innocent. "That isn't fair, Jessica," retorted Grace, laughing. "I appeal to you girls," turning to the other members of the Phi Sigma Tau, who had one by one dropped into the locker room. "Can you imagine me in the garb of an Oakdale policeman?" "Not in our wildest nightmares," Miriam Nesbit gravely assured her. "Anne will be home tomorrow," cried Eva Allen. "I'm so glad it's Saturday. We can celebrate. Will you come to my house?" "We will," was the united answer. "We'll all go to the train and meet Anne," planned Grace. "Then we'll give her about 1 hour to get acquainted with her family. After that we'll rush off to Eva's, back to my house for supper. Mother expects all of you, and then up to Mrs. Gray's." "Poor Anne," said Marian Barber. "I can see her being carried home on a stretcher." "We'll meet at the station," directed Grace as she left them. "Be there at 8:15. Don't one of you fail to be there." As Anne Pierson stepped off the 8:15 train the next morning after an all-night ride, she was surrounded by 7 laughing girls, and marched in triumph to David Nesbit's big car, which Miriam used at her own pleasure during her brother's absence. The 8 girls managed to squeeze into it and drove to the Pierson cottage with all speed. Here Anne was set down, told to make the most of her hour with her family, and to be prepared upon their return to say good-bye to home for the rest of the day. The programme outlined by Grace was carried out to the letter. The joy of Mrs. Gray at again seeing her adopted children was well worth witnessing. "I don't know how I ever managed to stay away from you so long," she exclaimed as she looked fondly about her at the smiling girlish faces. "How I wish you might all have been with me. I should have returned sooner, but dreaded the winter here. I do not thrive here during these long, cold Oakdale winters. It is because I—" Grace placed a soft hand upon Mrs. Gray's lips. "I can't allow you to finish that sentence," she laughed. "You are 62 years young, and you must always remember it." The old lady laughed happily at Grace's remark, then under cover of general conversation said to her, "I am greatly surprised to see Eleanor here. How did it all come about? You never mentioned it in your letters." "I know it," replied Grace. "I wanted to save it until you came home. I have been out to Heartsease several times, too, and am quite in love with Miss Nevin. May Anne and I come tomorrow and have a good long gossip? You must hear all about Anne's triumphs in New York." "Come and have dinner with me," replied Mrs. Gray. "That will be fine," returned Grace. "We 2 are the only ones in the crowd who don't happen to have previous engagements, so the girls won't feel hurt at not being included." "We are so glad that you came home in time for the concert," said Miriam Nesbit. "It is the last entertainment the senior class will have a chance to give. We hope to make a nice sum of money to add to the thousands we already have." "I have not added my mite to your funds yet," said Mrs. Gray, "but now that I am home I shall busy myself immediately with my high school girls. When and where is the concert to be held?" "A week from next Monday, in Assembly Hall," replied Miriam. "We wish to give it before the boys go back to school. They have only 10 days at home, you know." "How anxious I am to see the boys," cried Mrs. Gray. "I found a letter from Tom waiting for me. He expects to arrive on Monday or Tuesday, and will bring Arnold with him." "I received a letter from Tom, too," said Grace. "We've also heard from the boys. David is bringing home a friend of his, Donald Earle, who he writes is the most popular man in the freshman class." The evening seemed all too short to Mrs. Gray and the Phi Sigma Tau. "Why, we've only begun to talk," said Jessica, "and here it is after 11 o'clock." "To be continued in our next," said Nora with a grin, "introducing new features and startling revelations." Sunday afternoon found Anne and Grace strolling up Chapel Hill toward Mrs. Gray's. Rather to their surprise, they found Miss Nevin with Mrs. Gray in the library. The 2 women were in earnest conversation, and as Grace and Anne were ushered in, Grace's quick intuition told her that Miss Nevin was strongly agitated over something. "How are my own children to day?" asked Mrs. Gray, coming forward and kissing both of them warmly. Anne was then presented to Miss Nevin, who took occasion to congratulate her upon her recent success. "Your fame has preceded you," she said with a sweet smile. "You must tell us all about your stay in New York, Anne," said Mrs. Gray. "You are very young to have been chosen for so responsible an engagement, and I feel great pride in your success." "Anne had 2 offers of engagement while in New York," interposed Grace. "One from Farman, the big manager, and one from Rupert Manton, the Shakespearean actor." "But I'm still in Oakdale," replied Anne, smiling, "and have come today to beg for my secretaryship again." "You delightful child," cried Mrs. Gray. "I knew you would never desert me." "Margaret," she said, turning to Miss Nevin, "would you care to tell my girls what you were telling me when they came in? I've already told them something of Eleanor's parentage. They know that Guido Savelli is her father. Perhaps they might be of assistance in helping you decide what is to be done. Grace is a famous suggester." Miss Nevin flushed and looked hesitatingly at Anne and Grace, as though a trifle reluctant to speak. "We shall consider anything you may choose to tell as strictly confidential, Miss Nevin," said Anne quietly. "I am sure that you will," replied Miss Nevin. "What I have told Mrs. Gray is that I have received, through my lawyers, a letter from Eleanor's father. They enclosed his letter and one from them asking whether I was desirous of acquainting him with my whereabouts. He has written rather a sad letter. He seems to have awakened a late remorse for having neglected my sister as he did. He asks for his child, and if he may see her. He has just finished a concert tour of America, and is at present in New York. Personally, I shall never forgive him, but have I the right to keep Eleanor from her father? He is both rich and famous, and she would adore him for his music, if nothing else. I've always said that when she became 21 years of age I should tell her of him, leaving to her the choice of claiming or ignoring him. But I never supposed for one instant that he would ever come forward and interest himself in her. A year ago I should not have considered her fit to choose, but she is greatly changed. The 2 years in which she is associated with girls of her own age have benefited her greatly. I feel as though I could not bear to give her up now. Moreover, this idea of claiming his child may be merely a whim on the part of her father. He is liable to forget her inside of 6 weeks." Grace listened to Miss Nevin in breathless silence. It was all like a storybook romance. Anne sat gazing off into space, thinking dreamily of the great virtuoso who had found, after years of selfish pleasure and devotion to himself, that blood was thicker than water. She fancied and she could picture his pride when he beheld Eleanor and realized that she was his own child, and Eleanor's rapture when she knew that her father was master of the violin she worshipped. Suddenly an idea popped into Anne's head that was a positive inspiration. "Why not ask him to come down for our concert?" she said, amazed at her own audacity in suggesting such a thing. "Eleanor need not know about him at all. She is to play at the concert, you know. If he hears her play he will realize more fully that she is really his own flesh and blood, and if he has any real fatherly feelings for her, it will come to the surface. That will be the psychological moment in which to bring them together." "Anne, you are a genius," cried Grace. "You ought to be appointed chief arbiter of destiny." "Margaret," exclaimed Mrs. Gray, "I believe that Anne's idea is logical. Shall you try it?" "I shall write to Guido at once," said Miss Nevin, rising. "Knowing his disposition as I do, it seems that I could find no better way of rousing his interest in Eleanor. Her love of the violin is a direct inheritance from him, and she may reach his heart through her music. At any rate, it is worth trying." After Miss Nevin's departure, Anne and Grace entertained Mrs. Gray with the promised gossip, and it was well toward 10 o'clock before they turned their steps toward home. The following week was a busy one. Every spare moment outside school the senior class zealously devoted to the concert. The high school glee club was to sing, and the mandolin guitar club was to give 2 numbers. Nora O'Malley was to sing 2 songs from a late musical success, and Jessica and Miriam were to play a duet. James Gardiner, who was extremely proficient on the violoncello, was down for a solo, while Eleanor was to play twice. The crowning feature of the concert, however, was to be contributed by Anne and Eleanor. Anne was to recite Tennyson's Enoch Arden, and Eleanor was to accompany her on the piano with the music that she had arranged for it. The 2 girls had worked incessantly upon it, rehearsing almost every day. Grace was the only one who had been permitted to hear a rehearsal of it, and she was enraptured with what she heard. The boys had all arrived, and the Phi Sigma Tau divided their time equally between concert rehearsals and social gatherings. David's friend, Donald Earle, was ably living up to his college reputation, and proved himself a source of unmitigated pleasure to the young people among whom he was thrown. It was soon discovered, however, that he was oftenest found in Eleanor's wake, and his eyes showed honest admiration for the beautiful girl every time he looked at her. Hippy, who had established a reputation as a singer of humorous songs, was asked for his services. "I have a number of new and choice ditties that I will render with pleasure, providing I am afterwards fed," he shrewdly declared when interviewed on the subject. "It will all depend upon how well you sing," stipulated Nora. "Then I shan't warble at all," announced Hippy. "I am a man of few words, but when I say I must have food for my services as a soloist, I mean it. There must be no uncertainty. Do I feed or do I not?" "You feed," laughed Nora. The concert was to be held in Assembly Hall, and 3 days before, every ticket issued had been sold. People who could not attend bought tickets and handed them back to be sold over again. The senior class, by reason of popularity of the Phi Sigma Tau, was considered the class of classes. "We'll have to put out a standing room only sign," declared Anne Pierson, as she viewed the packed house through a hole in the curtain. The fateful night had arrived, and Anne, Eleanor, and Grace stood in a group on the stage, while Anne industriously took note of the audience. "Let me look for a minute, Anne," said Grace. "I don't believe there'll be standing room," she remarked as she stepped aside to give Eleanor a chance to peer out. "Come on, girls," called Nora O'Malley as a burst of applause sounded from the other side of the curtain. "It's 8:30 and the curtain will go up in about 2 minutes." The 3 girls scurried off the stage, the Glee Club filed on and arranged themselves, and the curtain rose. Each number was applauded to the echo, and in every instance the audience clamored for an encore. As the time for Eleanor's first solo drew near, Anne and Grace felt their hearts beat a little faster. Nora was giving an encore to her first song. Eleanor was to follow her. As she stood in the wing, her violin under her arm, Grace thought she had never appeared more beautiful. Her gown was of some soft white material and rather simply made. "I never like to wear fussy things when I play," she had confided to the girls. Jessica stood directly behind her. She was to act as accompanist. Nora O'Malley sang the concluding line of her song, favored the audience with a saucy little nod, and made her exit. "Come on, Eleanor," said Jessica. "It's our turn." Well toward the back of the hall sat Miss Nevin, wearing a look of mingled anxiety and pain. Beside her sat a dark, distinguished man in the prime of life, who never took his eyes off the stage. As one of the senior girls who had charge of the program stepped forward and announced, "Solo, Miss Eleanor Savelli," he drew a deep breath, and such a look of longing crept into his eyes that Miss Nevin understood for the first time something of the loneliness of which he had written. He covered his eyes with his hand as though reluctant to look. Then the full, soft notes of the violin were carried to his ears, and with a smothered cry of exultation he raised his eyes and saw for the first time his own child in her gown of white, with the instrument he loved at her throat, while her slender hand drew the bow with the true skill of the artist. Before Miss Nevin could stop him, he had risen in his seat, saying excitedly, "It is Mia Bella Edith. She has come again." Then, realizing what he had done, he sat down and, burying his face in his hands, sobbed openly. Persons around him, startled by his sudden cry, glared at him angrily for creating a commotion during Eleanor's exquisite number, then again turned their attention to the soloist. "I must see her. I must see her," he muttered over and over again. "She is my child. Mine." "So you shall," whispered Miss Nevin soothingly. "But not until the concert is over. If we tell her now, Guido, it will upset her so that she can't appear again this evening, and she has 2 more numbers." Unabashed by the emotion he had displayed, the virtuoso wiped his eyes and sat waiting like one in a trance for his child to appear again. Anne and Grace were alive with curiosity as to the outcome of Anne's suggestion. They had eagerly scanned the house before the concert began, but had failed to locate Miss Nevin and Eleanor's father. "I'm going out in the audience and see if I can find them," Grace had whispered to Anne during Nora's song as they stood in the wing on the opposite side from Jessica and Eleanor. Anne had nodded silently, her attention focused upon Nora, whose singing always delighted her, and Grace, slipping quietly down to the door that led into the hall, made her way toward the back rows of seats just in time to witness Guido Savelli's emotion at first sight of his daughter. Back to Anne she sped with her news, and the 2 friends held a quiet little jubilee of their own over the success of their plot. There was a round of applause when Enoch Arden was announced. Eleanor took her place at the piano, while Eleanor stepped forward and began the pathetic tale to the subdued strains of the music that Eleanor had fitted to it. Anne's beautiful voice rose and fell with wonderful expression, while the music served to accentuate every word that she uttered. Her audience sat practically spellbound, and when she uttered poor Enoch's death cry, "A sail! A sail! I am saved!" there were many wet eyes throughout the assemblage. She paused for a second before delivering the 3 concluding lines, and Eleanor ended on the piano with a throbbing minor chord. There was absolute silence as the performers made their exit. Then a perfect storm of enthusiasm burst forth. Anne and Eleanor returned to bow again and again, but the audience refused to be satisfied until Anne, in her clear, musical voice, made a little speech of appreciation, which was received with acclamation. The concert drew to a triumphant close. After Eleanor's second solo, she repaired to the dressing room, where she was immediately surrounded by a group of admiring girls, and kept so busy answering questions as to how long she had studied the violin and where, that she did not see Grace Harlowe enter the right wing with Miss Nevin and a tall, dark-haired stranger, who glanced quickly about as though in search of someone. "Where is he?" he said. "Find her at once. But no, wait a moment. She should hear me play. I will win the heart of my child through the music she loves. I may add one little solo to your program?" He turned questioningly to Grace. "Well, I should rather think so," gasped Grace. "It's an honor of which we never dreamed. This concert will be recorded in Oakdale history." "It is well," said the virtuoso. "Bring me the violin of my child. I will speak to her through it." Grace flew to the dressing room, where Eleanor's violin lay in its open case upon a table near the door. Hastily securing both violin and bow, she flitted out of the room, without having been noticed by the girls at the further end. "Here it is," she breathed as she handed it to Eleanor's father. "I will arrange for you to play after the Glee Club, who are just going on now." "I thank you," replied the great man. "I pray you do not announce me. I shall need no one to accompany me." "It shall be as you wish," promised Grace. There was a moment's wait after the Glee Club had filed off the stage, then Guido Savelli appeared, violin in hand. A faint ripple of surprise stirred the audience. Who was this distinguished stranger? They could not identify him as belonging among Oakdale musicians. The virtuoso made a comprehensive survey of the house, then placing the violin most caressingly to his throat, began to play. His hearers listened in growing astonishment to the exquisite sounds that he drew from the instrument. There was a plaintive, insistent appeal in his music that was like a pleading of a human voice. It was a pathetic cry wrung from a hungry heart. The dressing-room door stood partly open, and as the full, sweet notes of the violin were carried to her ears, Eleanor gave a cry of rapture. "Who is playing?" she cried. "I must see at once." She ran out of the room and into the wing where she could command a full view of the stage, and looked upon her father for the first time. She stood statue-like until the last note died away. Her eyes were full of tears, which she made no attempt to hide. Then she turned to Anne, who had slipped quietly up and now stood beside her. "Anne," she said almost reverently, "he is a master. His music overwhelms me. I felt when he played as though he were trying to give me some message, as though he were speaking to me alone. I suppose every one in the audience felt the same. It is because he is a genius. Who is he, Anne, and where did he come from?" "Eleanor," replied Anne, her voice trembling a little, "you must prepare yourself for the greatest surprise of your life. He was speaking true when he played, and it was solely on your account that he played. He came here with your aunt tonight." Eleanor paled a little. "Anne, what does all this mean?" she said. "You and Grace have acted queerly all evening. What has this violinist to do with me?" "That I cannot answer now," replied Anne, "but you will know within the next hour. Your aunt wishes you to get your wraps and meet her at once. She is outside in the carriage, and he is with her." "Are you and Grace coming with us?" questioned Eleanor. "Not tonight," answered Anne with a little smile. "You don't need either of us. Here's Grace," she added, as the latter hurried toward them. "Eleanor," said Grace, "here is your cloak and your violin. Now kiss both of us good night and trot along, for there is a big surprise waiting for you just around the corner, and it is the earnest wish of both Anne and I that it may prove a happy one." End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Grace Harlowe's Senior Year at High School by Jessie Graham Flower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 24 The Parting of the Ways. With the passing of the Easter holidays, unbroken quiet settled down over Oakdale High School. The boys went back to college and the girls to high school to finish the little that remained to them of the senior year. The proceeds of the concert had amounted to $470, and with a contribution of $500 more from Mrs. Gray, the members of the senior class were the proud possessors of a fund of $1,980, which was to be presented to Miss Thompson on graduation night as their contribution toward the gymnasium. The three lower classes had also raised considerable money, but collectively it had not reached the amount earned by the seniors. The playing of the great Savelli at the concert was still a matter of comment in Oakdale. There were several persons in the audience who had previously heard him play, and had at once recognized him. More remarkable still was the fact of his being the father of Eleanor Savelli, and all sorts of rumors sprang up regarding his advent in Oakdale and his affairs in general. As for Eleanor, it was some time before she could accustom herself to the idea of having a living father, and a famous one at that. She had gone down to the carriage on the night of the concert wondering what was in store for her, and had scarcely stepped inside before she had been clasped in the arms of the virtuoso and addressed as his child. Shaking herself free from his clasp, she had demanded an explanation from her aunt, who had told her the truth, which to her at the time had seemed unbelievable. Her first feeling toward her father had been entirely one of pride. Her aunt had been all in all to her since babyhood, therefore she experienced little of the feeling of affection toward him that he manifested for her. The fact that her father was a great artist was a source of infinite satisfaction to her, but gradually as she grew better acquainted with him she began to experience a degree of affection for him that in time became positive worship. He was to remain at Heartsease until after her graduation. Then, accompanied by Miss Nevin, Eleanor was to sail for Italy with him, there to remain until he should begin a European concert tour in the fall. Then she would go to Leipzig and enter the very conservatory where her mother and father had met. She had resumed the final I so long dropped from her name, and now proudly signed herself Savelli. The Phi Sigma Tau, particularly Anne and Grace, became prime favorites with the great violinist, and were frequently invited to Heartsease to hear him play, an honor which was accorded to no one else in Oakdale. The days hurried by altogether too swiftly to suit Grace and her three closest friends, who looked forward to commencement week with mingled emotions of joy and regret. Graduation was a goal they had been striving for 4 years to reach, but graduation also meant the parting of the ways, and as the four chums looked back over their high school life, it seemed to them that they could never again have quite the good times that they had enjoyed in one another's society. "We who are about to die salute you," quoted Nora O'Malley as the four girls strolled home from school on the Friday preceding commencement. "What a cheerful remark," laughed Grace Harlowe. "Well, that's the way I feel, at any rate," declared Nora. "I can't bear to think that next year we'll all be scattered to the four winds, or rather the two winds, because Jessica and I will be together, and so will you and Anne." "Go to college with us, then," slyly tempted Grace. "No," answered Nora decidedly. "I've set my heart on studying vocal music. I've always said that I should go to a conservatory, and since Eleanor's father has given me so much encouragement, I've made up my mind to become a concert singer if possible. I'll stay a year in a conservatory at least, and at the end of that time I'll know whether I am justified in going on studying." "It's fortunate that I am going to study on the piano, and that we can be at the same conservatory," said Jessica. "And that Anne and I will be at the same college," added Grace, "if we ever make up our minds what college we wish to enter." "There's still plenty of time for that," said Anne. "I am glad that scholarship doesn't stipulate as to what particular college, that is, if I win it." "You won't know that until a week from tonight," said Jessica. "What a night that will be. This year there will be an extra feature, the presentation of the gym money." "I'm so proud of our class," exclaimed Grace, "but I do wish we had an even $2,000 to give. We lack only $20. I wonder if the class would care to make it up." "Why couldn't the Phi Sigma Tau make it up as a parting gift to Oakdale High School?" said Nora. "That would only be $2.50 apiece. I'm willing to do with that much less fuss on my graduating gown, if the rest of you are." "I am," said Grace. "So am I," replied Jessica and Anne together. "I'm sure the other four girls will be of the same mind," said Grace. "I'll see them tomorrow." The four other members of the Phi Sigma Tau were duly interviewed, and by Monday of commencement week the $20 had been added to the fund deposited in Upton Bank. The prophecy made by Jessica on class day at the end of their sophomore year was about to be fulfilled to the letter, for the four chums had been appointed to the very honors to which she had jestingly assigned them 2 years before. Anne was chosen as class poet, and Jessica had composed both the words and music of the class song. Grace was to prophesy the futures of her various classmates, while Nora had been detailed to write the class grinds. "Today is the day of days," exclaimed Grace to her mother on Tuesday as she smoothed out a tiny wrinkle in her class day gown, which she lovingly inspected for the 5th time before putting it on. It was a pale blue marquisette embroidered in tiny daisies, and Grace declared it to be far prettier than her graduating gown of white organdie trimmed with flying lace. "Nora has the dearest little pale green marquisette, Mother," said Grace with enthusiasm, "and Jessica's gown is pink silk, while Anne has a white silk muslin with violets scattered all over it. I've seen them all, but I must say that I think mine is the nicest, and you're a perfect dear, Mother, for having embroidered it for me." And giving her mother a tempestuous hug, Grace gathered her class day finery in her arms and rushed upstairs to dress for the afternoon that the senior class looked forward to more than to graduation night itself. The Phi Sigma Tau met in the senior locker room for the last time and proceeded to Assembly Hall in a body. "How strange it seems to be going to Assembly Hall instead of the gym for class day," remarked Miriam Nesbit to Grace. "Yes, doesn't it?" returned Grace. "But when we come back here next year as postgraduates, we'll have the satisfaction of knowing that we helped a whole lot in getting the good old gymnasium ready for the next class, even if we couldn't hold forth in it." The regular class day program was carried out with tremendous enthusiasm. The girl chums were applauded to the echo of their capable handling of the honors assigned them. Nora, in particular, rose to heights of fame, her clever grinds provoking wholesale mirth. "She must have made notes all year," whispered Anne to Jessica under cover of a laugh which was occasioned by the story of one absent-minded senior who pushed her glasses up over her forehead, searched diligently for them through the halls and locker room, and convinced that she had lost them on the street, inserted an advertisement in one of the Oakdale newspapers before going home that night. "She did," replied Jessica. "She has always said that she wanted the job of writing the grinds." At the close of the exercises Grace delivered a spirited senior charge which was ably answered by the junior president. The class song composed by Jessica was sung, the graduates and audience joined in singing "Auld Lang Syne." Then the air was rent with class yells, while the graduates received the congratulations of their friends and then repaired to their banquet. Wednesday brought Hippy, Reddy, and David, and also Donald Earle to Oakdale, while Tom Gray and Arnold Evans appeared on Thursday afternoon to the relief of their young friends. "Better late than never," called Tom Gray as he and Arnold hurried off the train to where David and his 3 friends stood eagerly scanning the train for them. "We thought it would be never," retorted Hippy. "We were about to postpone commencement until some time next week and order the flags at half-mast, but now things can proceed as usual." "Hustle up, fellows," commanded David. "We're not the only ones who are anxious. The girls are all over at our house. There will be a foregathering and a dinner there, and an after-gathering at your aunt's, Tom, so pile into my car and I'll take you up Chapel Hill on the double quick." Inside of an hour the 2 young men were crossing the Nesbits' lawn and making for the broad veranda where a bevy of pretty girls stood ready to greet them. "We're so glad you got here at last," cried Grace. "If you hadn't come on that train you wouldn't have seen us graduate. The next train from your part of the world doesn't get in until 10 o'clock." "We missed the early train and had to wait 2 hours," replied Tom. "But now that we are here, you'll find that you can't drive us away with a club." "We shan't try to," said Nora. "Now if you were Hippy—" "Nothing could drive me from your presence," interrupted Hippy hastily, "so don't try it. Let's change the subject. That word club has an ugly sound. It makes me nervous." "Never mind, Hippy," said Miriam. "Nora shall not tease you. I'll protect you." "Nora, go away. I am protected," exclaimed Hippy, and getting behind Miriam he peered forth at Nora with such a ludicrous expression that she laughed, and immediately declared a truce by allowing him to sit on the rustic seat beside her. It was a memorable dinner. The girls in their dainty white graduating gowns, their eyes alight with the joy of youth, and the young men with their clean-cut, boyish faces made a picture that Mrs. Nesbit viewed with a feeling of pleasure that was akin to pain. The start for Assembly Hall was made at a little after 7, as the girls were to join the senior class there and proceed to the stage, where the class was to sit in a body. Nearly every member of the class carried flowers of some description that had been given to them by their families and friends. Grace and her chums were supremely happy in that their social world had turned out to do them honor. Mrs. Gray and Miss Nevin, accompanied by Eleanor's father, were seated near the front with Mrs. Gibson and the Southards, who had arrived at Hawk's Nest on the previous day. Grace's father and mother, Judge Putnam and his sister, Mrs. Nesbit, Nora's brothers and sister, and Jessica's father were scattered about through the house. When the graduates took their places upon the stage, there was a tumultuous applause. To the citizens of Oakdale who had known the young women from babyhood, the present class seemed the finest Oakdale High School had yet turned out. "Bless these dears," said Miss Thompson to Miss Tebbs as the girls filed past them and onto the stage. "They are without exception the most brilliant lot of girls I have ever had charge of. But of them all there is no one of them quite equal to Grace. She's the ideal type of all that a high school girl should be, and when I say that, I've paid her the highest compliment in my power." The slight difficulty that had arisen between Grace and the principal during Grace's junior year had long since been adjusted by Eleanor, who had gone to Miss Thompson with a frank confession of her transgressions during her junior year. Miss Thompson had freely forgiven her and had fully appreciated the sense of honor that had prompted the deed. As the class was large, 15 girls from the entire number had been chosen to deliver essays and addresses. Among them were Anne, Eleanor, Grace, Miriam, and Nora. "I'm just as well satisfied that I was not chosen," Jessica whispered to Eva Allen as Grace stepped forward to deliver the salutatory address. "It's easy to see who is first in the hearts of Oakdale," returned Eva. "Grace won't be able to begin this evening if they don't stop it." The moment that Grace had risen to deliver her address the commotion began, and it was not until Miss Thompson rose and smilingly held up her hand for silence that the noisy reception accorded Grace died away. Anne, as valedictorian, was only a trifle less warmly received, and her eyes grew misty as she remembered how she had come to Oakdale poor and unknown, and entirely without friends, until Grace had so nobly championed her cause. The bestowal of the freshman prize followed the graduates' addresses. Then came the announcement of the winners of the scholarships. There were 2 of these, and every one of Anne's friends listened anxiously for her name. They were not disappointed, for Anne's name was the first called. She had won the Upton scholarship of $250 a year at whatever college she should decide to enter. After the scholarships had been disposed of, a representative of each of the 3 lower classes in turn, beginning with the freshmen, presented the gymnasium money to Miss Thompson. The freshmen had collected over $300, the sophomores $500, and the juniors $650. Lastly, Grace rose from her place among her class and presented Miss Thompson with a check for the $2,000, part of which had figured the limelight of publicity. And there was one girl in the row of graduates whose heart beat uncomfortably faster for a moment as she thought of how differently it might have all ended for her had it not been the fearless energy of Grace Harlowe. It was over at last. The graduates received their diplomas and were admonished as to their future careers by the president of the Board of Education, whose speech concluded the exercises. As they were leaving the stage, Jessica, whose eyes had been anxiously searching the audience from the beginning of the exercises, gave a little cry and, hurrying down the steps, rushed straight into the arms of a brown-eyed girl in a traveling gown who stood waiting at the foot of the steps. "Oh, you dear Mabel," cried Jessica joyously. "Where did you come from?" "Mother and I didn't get in until almost 9 o'clock, so we came here at once," replied Mabel Allison. "Mother is over there. Come and see her." "I've been so disappointed," declared Jessica. "We hoped you would be here for class day, and when you didn't come today I gave up in despair. We intended to start last Friday, but Mother was ill for a day or 2, and that delayed us. You know it is quite a journey from Denver here." Jessica and Mabel quickly made their way to Mrs. Allison, and a moment or 2 later were surrounded by the Phi Sigma Tau, and marched off in triumph to Mrs. Gray, who was in the midst of a group of her intimate friends. After a great deal of handshaking and general greeting, the entire party of guests, young and old, set off to Mrs. Gray's beautiful home. The young people had elected to walk, and strolled along through the white moonlight, carefree, the world before them. The old members of the party who had ridden to the house were awaiting them on the veranda. Soon after they all repaired to the dining room, where a collation was served them at 2 long tables, at the close of which toasts were in order, and every one was drunk down in the fruit punch provided for the occasion. When the gamut of toasting had been finally run on, Mr. Harlowe arose and said, "I have been appointed a spokesman by a committee composed of the fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters of the 8 young women who are the cause of all this celebration. The committee of which I speak may not in any sense compare with that august body known as the Phi Sigma Tau, but nevertheless it can boast of at least having held several secret sessions, the result of those sessions being this. A long time ago I promised my daughter Grace that my graduation gift to her should be a trip to Europe. Knowing what an addition to the trip the society of her young friends would be, I interviewed those responsible for the welfare of the Phi Sigma Tau, and it was decided that her sorority should accompany her. As certain members of the aforesaid committee also feel entitled to vacations, it is quite probable that the Phi Sigma Tau will sail with at least a round dozen of chaperones. In fact, I have seriously considered chartering a liner. Now I have done my duty, and anyone who wishes may make remarks." Then a perfect babel arose, and everyone tried to express their opinion at once. As for the Phi Sigma Tau, they were in the seventh heaven of rapture. Even Anne, who, in spite of Mr. Harlowe's assurance, knew that for her the trip was practically impossible, rejoiced for her friend's sake. "Come here, Anne," commanded Mrs. Gray from the head of the table. "Anne is my own dear child," said the old lady. "In the past 4 years she has been not only my secretary, but a daughter as well. As her foster mother, I claim the privilege of sending her to Europe. It shall be my graduation gift to her." "3 cheers for Mrs. Gray," proposed Hippy, rising, and they were given with a will. "And are all of you boys going too?" Grace asked delightedly of Tom Gray. "Going? Well, I rather think so," he replied with emphasis. "We are going all at once, and with both feet foremost," declared Hippy. "First we shall all be seasick. After that we shall prowl about Westminster Abbey and ruin our eyesight reading inscriptions on tombs. After that we shall be arrested in France for our Franco-American accent. We shall break our collarbones and bruise our shins doing strenuous Alpine stunts, and we shall turn a disapproving eye upon Russia and incidentally expose a few Nihilists. We shall fish in the Grand Canal at Venice and wear our shoes prancing about Florence on a still hunt for old masters. Last and by no means least, we shall sample everything to eat from English muffins to Hungarian goulash." "I knew he'd end with something like that," sniffed Nora contemptuously. "I'm surprised that he ended at all," laughed David. "Those who have followed Grace Harlowe through her 4 years at high school will hear from her again in college. In Grace Harlowe's first year at Overton College are set down the eventful happenings of her freshman year, and her many friends will find her to be the same generous, warm-hearted young woman who won their admiration and respect during her high school days. End of chapter 24. Recording by Ashley Jane. End of Grace Harlowe's Senior Year at High School by Jessie Graham Flower.